Welcome back to the third installment of the X is Not That Well Animated series here on this channel. In these videos, we take shows that are praised for being well animated and point out visual flaws in them. Negativity reigns supreme, basically. In today's episode, let's call it that, we'll talk about Bleach, the 1000-year Blood War arc. Now, Bleach is immensely popular, and on top of that, the series returned after 10 whole years. Naturally, there was a lot of hype surrounding it, and an unfortunate side effect of hype is people failing to notice obvious flaws in something. This new installment of Bleach was nowhere near as good looking as people made it out to be. In a way, it's the opposite of Jujutsu Kaisen. JJK had incredible animation for the most part, but the compositing and art direction left a lot to be desired. Bleach, on the other hand, had solid compositing, but the actual animation wasn't anything special for the most part. Of course, episode 6 is an exception, so is some of episode 7, but generally speaking. I did have high hopes based on the first episode. It looked quite promising, the compositing looked very different from the rest of Bleach, and the animation was solid, especially the Hiroyuki Yamashita sequence and the effects done by Satoshi Sakai. The episode wasn't flawless, the movement was often lacking, the characters were somewhat off model at times, and the compositing occasionally felt a bit off, but it still looked good. However, the quality dipped very quickly. The first episode was the only one that featured Hiroyuki Yamashita's animation. The storyboards got less creative from that point on. The overly flashy compositing was often detrimental to the overall product, and the animation as a whole was quite limited. Let's discuss each of these topics in a bit more detail. The compositing is an interesting subject. There are scenes where it works and scenes where it looks off. For example, I loved the compositing in the 6th episode. The bright look worked really well with all the fire. Also, the slightly desaturated dry look complemented Yamamoto's ability very well. However, the compositing on the blue Quincy powers is way too much. You can't really appreciate the effects animation when your retinas are actively being burned by the compositing. It's overly flashy and a lot of it ends up looking like colorful nothing. The overall look is good. The lighting is fairly decent, especially during certain scenes in episode 6. However, some of the scenes are a bit too dark, making them somewhat hard to follow. It's a pet peeve of mine, a scene being too dark or too drowned out in colors, so maybe I'm overreacting a bit. They are obviously going for a non-muted, flashy, Ufotable-like look with the overall compositing, although they are not even close in that aspect, let's be honest. Ufotable shows and even Sword Art Online Alicization is a lot more competent when it comes to this style of compositing. The storyboards were a mixed bag as well. I loved the storyboards for the first couple of episodes, as well as the storyboards for episodes 6 and 13, all of which were done by series director Tomohisa Taguchi, but the rest of the episodes felt basic in comparison. Besides a couple of cuts, the scenes were structured in a bland and uninteresting way. I expected the storyboards to be a bit more complicated and unique, given the gravity of this arc, but what I got was only slightly more impressive than a standard action anime. Let's also talk about the actual animation, which is probably the most overrated aspect of this show. Before we talk about that in detail, let me explain what limited animation is. Imagine this, you're watching an anime with an average production value. It's not the best looking show in the world, but it doesn't look bad either. There's a fight scene going on and you notice a lack of movement. It's not quite a still frame, the hair and the fabric is moving, but it's the same looped sequence over and over. That's limited animation. Animation that is limited. It's in the name, really. Bleach had a lot of it. Now, there's nothing wrong with a show that uses limited animation for the unimportant fights and spends their time on the more important ones. That's how most action shows work. However, I have to point that out. Don't get me wrong, most episodes featured at least 1 or 2 well animated cuts, and not every show will have that Jujutsu Kaisen tier action Sakuga every single episode. However, it is Bleach, one of the most popular anime ever, returning after a decade. You'd expect a bit more. For some reason, a lot of Bleach fans seem to think that people are complaining about the lack of character acting. I mean, some people may be, but I'm not. I never expected Chainsaw Man tier character acting from Bleach. Naturally, I didn't get it either, but I don't have a problem with that. I just expected the overall action animation to be a bit more consistent. A lot of the heavy lifting in the action department was done by action animation director Yoshihiro Kano, who either corrected or animated most of the action scenes. His work was really good, but there's only so much one man can do. Maybe my expectations are way too high, but think about it this way. Jujutsu Kaisen never had a particularly good schedule either, and it had twice as many episodes. Yet it managed to pull out consistent looking action animation every single time. Even shows like My Hero Academia, which isn't exactly a Sakuga fest, had a distinct look and style of line work which made the limited animation more palatable. Is something like that really too much to ask from an established franchise like Bleach? It's not a long-running show anymore, it's a seasonal release. I'd imagine that they had more time. I'm not expecting every episode to look like episode 6, I'm just expecting more than one episode to look like that. When it comes to the visuals, putting Bleach in the same sentence as Chainsaw Man or Mob Psycho should be a crime, it really should be. Also, the term movie quality has lost all meaning by this point. If Bleach 1000-Year Blood War is quote movie quality, what is TV anime quality supposed to be? The third season of 7 Deadly Sins? Even at its best, the animation isn't as good as some of the standout cuts from the previous iteration of this show. If you think that I'm being overly negative, feel free to argue down in the comments. Also, that is the main idea behind this video. If you want to hear me praise Bleach for its visuals, go watch my animation breakdown for the 6th episode. I do a lot of praising there. My problem with Bleach, visually speaking, can be summarized as follows. The storyboard work, besides a few episodes, largely came off as uninteresting. The animation wasn't as good as people made it out to be. It was often limited in nature and felt quite basic. The animation was accompanied and often carried by an overly flashy and somewhat sloppy style of compositing, which was a breath of fresh air. However, it did occasionally undermine the animation, the effects in particular. Overall, I don't think that this show looked bad. I never expected it to look like Chainsaw Man, which was an industry-wide passion project. Only Chainsaw Man looks like Chainsaw Man. I wanted it to have its own unique look. The show didn't look too basic. The compositing was unique and some of the visual decisions were creative. The pink accents come to mind, but a vast majority of it looked like a standard well-polished show, with one episode looking a lot like Castlevania. Honestly, I was a bit disappointed. So that was it. Did you like the visuals for Bleach? Comment down below. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and until next time.